Sheri Coleman adored her spouse and simply desired contentment. When menacing notes began appearing, addressed to her loved ones, she feared most for her sons. Could an individual truly be capable of causing harm, even to her young children? This marks the beginning of the heartbreaking events that befell the Coleman household. Chris Coleman was born on March 20th, 1977, to a family of Christian pastors, Ron and Connie, in Chester, Illinois, Columbia. He and his two siblings were brought up in strict accordance with church customs. The Coleman household was deeply devout. Chris grew up as a highly compliant child, excelled academically, assisted his parents, engaged in sports, and took part in all church activities. He was an exemplary kid, student, and athlete, as described by his father. The coach was also immensely pleased with the achievements of this exceptional boy. During his elementary school years, Chris participated in basketball, baseball, and track and field. However, he was also known for being kind, sensitive, and the most introverted among the three brothers. While this trait was considered endearing in childhood, it was perceived as a shortcoming in his teenage years. His parents aimed to instill masculine qualities in him, such as resilience and perseverance. But this proved to be challenging. On one occasion, his father took him hunting, and they caught a rabbit. Ron proceeded to take the animal's life in Chris's presence, leaving the boy inconsolable and utterly distraught. He felt deep compassion for the rabbit and never went hunting again. This heightened sensitivity impacted his interactions with peers and led to numerous challenges during Chris's adolescence. The boy consistently felt that he lacked sufficient masculinity and struggled to express himself effectively. Chris recognized the need for change in his life to cultivate the necessary attributes of a man. When a Marine Corps recruiter visited his high school and discussed military service, Chris was captivated. He was so impressed by the recruiter's demeanor and public presence that he decided to enlist. Immediately following his high school graduation, Chris joined the armed forces. His parents responded to his decision with composure, understanding that the Marine Corps would provide him with the opportunity to develop the precise qualities he lacked. Chris even preemptively shaved his head, as it lent his face a more rugged appearance. The young man truly thrived in his Marine Corps service, earning numerous certificates and awards, feeling that he was destined for this path. In 1997, when Chris turned 20, he encountered his contemporary 20-year-old Sheri Weiss, a member of the Air Force Parliament. They met while both studying at a canine center in San Antonio. Sheri was born on July 3, 1977, and friends characterized her as a carefree, easygoing, and flirtatious girl who lived in the moment. Sheri was always curious about the surprises the future held. She had a desire to discover the world, which likely motivated her to join the Air Force. From their initial encounter, Chris Coleman appealed to her, a shy, pleasant guy, and Sheri's cheerful, carefree nature attracted Chris. They complemented each other well, leading to a quick connection and a rapidly developing romance. For Chris, this marked one of his first long-term relationships, as his upbringing had been quite strict and had not taught him how to properly conduct himself to win the affection of girls. However, Sheri's heart, open to all, knew no barriers. The girl was unabashed in displaying her emotions and expressing affection for family, friends, and now for Chris. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. In August 1997, a mere 3 months into their courtship, Chris brought Sheri to his parents' residence to introduce her to the family, presenting her as his girlfriend. His parents were taken aback by the revelation. From the initial encounter, Sheri failed to make a notable impression on them. Connie described her as a petite blonde girl clad in short shorts with a tattoo adorning her leg, an image that diverged from their envisioned future daughter-in-law. Sheri appeared neither intelligent nor attractive to them. The father was utterly perplexed as to how anyone could be drawn to her, believing that their son could have found a more suitable partner. The day following the meeting with his parents, Chris and Sheri embarked on a 6-hour journey to Chicago. During the trip, the young man contacted his father, Ron, expressing his desire to share astonishing news. He and Sheri had recently wed. The silence that ensued on the phone conveyed the father's lack of enthusiasm for the event. It came to light that Chris and Sheri's marriage was precipitated by the girl's pregnancy. Connie, Chris's mother, labeled her daughter-in-law a sinful woman who had ensnared her son into this godless union through pregnancy. In reality, the guy's parents harbored no specific grievances against Sheri. They simply did not hold her in high regard. Ron and Connie never uttered a single complimentary word about her, despite their roles as pastors who preached love and acceptance of all. Regrettably, it is not uncommon for many religious individuals to fail to practice what they preach to others. Upon their marriage, Chris and Sheri relocated to a tranquil suburb in Columbia, Missouri, with the intention of raising their future children there. Their first son, Garrett, was born in 1998, followed by the arrival of their second son, Gavin, in 2000. The decision to move was not solely based on the children, but also influenced by Chris's professional aspirations. The young man secured a position as a bodyguard for Joyce Meyer, a renowned American TV host, author, preacher, and multimillionaire. This woman appeared on television with the aim of converting as many viewers as possible to Christianity and encouraging them to contribute money to religious organizations. Naturally, her activities attracted a great deal of criticism, condemnation, and earned her a significant number of adversaries. Joyce Meyer's lifestyle was deemed excessively extravagant, as she utilized ministry funds to finance her luxurious home, expensive cars, and private planes. All of this contradicted the teachings she imparted to ordinary people. Due to her extensive work-related travel and the negative sentiment surrounding her persona, she required private security and a personal bodyguard to accompany her on trips. Chris was ideally suited for this challenging role. Joyce was, in fact, a close acquaintance of the Coleman family, having known Chris virtually since his birth. His military background and personal connection with Meyer facilitated his swift ascent through the ranks, ultimately becoming the head of security and the preacher's personal bodyguard. The position offered a substantial remuneration, exceeding $100,000 per year. This substantial salary enabled Chris to support his young family, while Sheri could focus on caring for the children and managing household responsibilities during her husband's travels. Coleman dedicated a significant amount of time to his work, putting in 80-90 hours per week. While he generally enjoyed working in security and appreciated Joyce herself, there were moments when he couldn't tolerate Joyce Meyer. His feelings were quite mixed. On one hand, he was content with the lifestyle that his position afforded him. Chris accompanied Joyce everywhere, and when she went shopping, she frequently bought him nice gifts. They had a close rapport, to the extent that he was familiar with her clothing size and the color of her underwear. At times, he admired Meyer, while at other times, he simply despised her. On the other hand, he suspected that the religious aspect of her work was likely fraudulent and couldn't comprehend how people earning meager wages would contribute a portion of their hard-earned money to religious organizations. Then, Chris would remind himself that he was still Joyce's bodyguard and would begin to defend her, claiming that she earned her money through her writing. After the wedding, Sheri, a young woman who belonged to the Catholic Church but had never given much thought to matters of faith, unexpectedly seemed to be born again. She became deeply devoted not only to her family but also to the church. Sheri planned and organized missionary trips, purchased blankets and food for those in need, and arranged charity events. She did all of this primarily for Chris and his family. Sheri understood the importance of religion to them, and even despite the terrible treatment she received from her husband's parents, she genuinely wanted to win the favor of her mother-in-law and father-in-law. When Sheri became a mother of two and started raising them, she truly became immersed in the faith of her husband and his family. While Chris was away, Sheri always bought gifts for him and prepared cute surprises. The woman told all her relatives and acquaintances what a wonderful husband she had. In reality, their marriage had its share of ups and downs, as they disagreed on many issues. And although he was constantly not at home, Sheri did not suffer from loneliness. Motherhood did not transform her into a mom on a net, tirelessly watching over her children. The woman was still full of energy, life, and fun, while simultaneously being an excellent mother. Both boys played sports. Garrett played football, while Gavin played baseball and was an avid fan. Both sons were an exact copy of their mother in character, just as lively, active, and cheerful. At the same time, both Garrett and Gavin were polite and obedient. Sheri was always on the side of her rascals, allowing them to have fun as they wanted, and was gentle with them. She believed that boys should be so proactive and sociable. Chris, on the other hand, insisted on discipline. He expected excellence from his sons in everything, from their manners to how they expressed themselves in sports. Chris always behaved a little aloof towards the children, was restrained, and did not openly show fatherly affection and tenderness, never hugging or kissing his boys, or his wife Sheri for that matter. Chris simply did not know how to express his feelings and emotions openly. Let's move on to November 14th, 2008. Joyce Meyer, Chris's employer, received many threats due to her activities. On that day, she herself, her husband, and son received a strange email. The subject of the letter immediately caught the woman's attention. It mentioned the family of her bodyguard, Sheri Coleman, and the threat of its destruction. The essence of the message was as follows. Whoever received this letter should convey the information to Chris and Joyce. The TV host was asked to stop her sermons, or otherwise the family of her head of security would suffer. The author of these lines pointed out that if he could not get to Joyce, then he would get to someone close to her, and since Chris follows Meyer on all trips, his family is not protected by anything. While he is guarding Joyce, his wife and children will die. The sender of the letter also knew exactly the schedule of all the upcoming planned meetings of the TV preacher. The next day, November 15th, Joyce's family and Chris received another email where the threats continued. The unknown person demanded a personal meeting with Meyer and that she return his money to him. If this meeting did not take place, then he would start sending her loved ones to the next world one by one, starting with the family of Sheri Coleman. Over the next few months, the threats only worsened, to the point that this person put a letter in the mailbox at the Coleman family home. It ended with the words, "I'm watching you." This letter was not sent by mail. The unknown individual personally put it in the box. This occurred while Chris was out of town, accompanying Joyce in Hawaii. Sheri, who opened the envelope, was very frightened. She immediately called Chris's parents, her family, and all close friends, telling them about the threats against her and the children. Chris took the threats to his family extremely seriously upon returning from his business trip. He reported the matter to the police, resulting in increased patrols in their neighborhood. He informed the neighbors about the potential danger and requested that they report any suspicious individuals seen near the Coleman residence. Fortunately, the neighbor living across the street from them happened to be Detective Justin Barlow of the Columbia Police Department. When Chris approached him, he volunteered to redirect his outdoor surveillance camera towards the Coleman's house to monitor their driveway and mailbox. On May 4th, 2009, this camera captured footage of Chris and his two sons, Garrett and Gavin, playing ball in the driveway. Tragically, just 12 hours after these images were recorded, the unthinkable occurred. On May 5th at 5:43 a.m., Chris departed from the family home to go to the gym. During his journey, he attempted to call Sheri to wake her up, but his wife did not respond. While exercising, Chris managed to send his wife numerous messages, inquiring if she had woken up and reminding her that it was time to get the children ready. He then wrote that he had about 5 minutes left of cardio training before he would return home, but all these messages went unanswered. Chris left the gym at 6:40 a.m. and began driving home. During the drive, at 6:43, he called his neighbor, Detective Barlow, and requested that he check on Sheri and the boys. He was concerned that he had not received a response to either his calls or messages. Given all the threats they had received, Chris was extremely worried about his family, especially considering the most recent email received a few days earlier on April 27th, which spoke of a final warning. The attacker hinted that the worst nightmare of Chris's life was about to unfold. Detective Barlow got out of bed, got dressed, and as a precautionary measure, called the dispatcher at the Columbia Police Department, requesting that several officers be sent to the Coleman's address. He crossed the street and knocked on the front door, but no one answered. By that time, other police officers had already arrived at the house. They walked around the building and noticed an open window on the first floor at the back. The protective screen had been removed, leading law enforcement officials to suspect that something was amiss, and they called for reinforcements. Upon entering the house, they immediately realized that a crime had taken place there. All the walls inside were painted with blood-red spray paint. There were inscriptions such as, "I'm watching you," "Punished," "You paid," and so on. All the bedrooms were located on the second floor, and that's where the police discovered the lifeless bodies of 31-year-old Sheri, 11-year-old Garrett, and 9-year-old Gavin. They were all lying in their beds, showing no signs of life. Sheri had been brutally beaten. Her naked body was lying face down, and a vulgar expletive was written on the wall of the master bedroom. The perpetrator didn't even bother to cover the poor woman's body with a sheet or throw a blanket over it. Gavin, who had celebrated his birthday just 5 days earlier, was only partially covered with a sheet on which an obscene inscription was written. The body of the older son, Garrett, was completely covered with a blanket, and there were no inscriptions on it, likely because the attacker had run out of spray paint rather than out of mercy. There were no signs of struggle on the boys' bodies, indicating that everything happened while they were asleep. Shortly after the horrific discovery, at 6:56 a.m., Chris arrived at the house. Detective Barlow went out to meet him, blocked his path, and informed him that no one had survived. They were unable to save them. As the house was already cordoned off as a crime scene, Chris was instructed to remain outside and not enter. The homeowner did not argue. He turned around, sat right on the driveway, and called his father. The Columbia Police Department immediately requested the assistance of the Major Crimes Unit, and Chris Coleman was taken to the police station for a detailed account of that morning's events. According to Chris, he woke up around 5:30 a.m. Sheri was still dozing. He kissed her and went to the gym, from where he tried to call several times and send several messages. Not receiving an answer, the man became worried and hurried to finish his workout. Upon leaving the gym, the first thing he did was call Detective Barlow and ask him to check the house. The investigators asked Chris if he had noticed anything strange that morning. He said nothing special. The only unusual thing was a car that he encountered near the house. The car specifically slowed down to allow Chris to drive out of the driveway as he headed to the gym. At this time, the police were viewing Chris's phone, home computers, and the recordings from that morning from Detective Barlow's surveillance camera. The investigators found several aspects of Chris's behavior and statements suspicious from the very beginning. When he returned home from the gym and was informed that his entire family had been killed, he showed almost no reaction to the devastating news. While everyone processes grief differently, Chris did not ask a single question or attempt to enter the house. Detective Barlow had anticipated needing several officers to restrain the distraught neighbor upon learning about the deaths of his sons. But Chris simply sat on the driveway and began calling his parents. His demeanor did not align with that of a grief-stricken father and husband who had just lost his entire family. Later, at the police station, when asked if he and Sheri had argued the night before, he covered his face with his hands and pretended to sob, but it appeared contrived to the trained eyes of the detectives. Another point that raised doubts about Chris's story was the presence of redness, scratches, and bruises on his hands. This could suggest that he had recently been involved in a physical altercation, and considering that Sheri had been severely beaten before her death, it seemed too suspicious to be a mere coincidence. Additionally, before Chris was taken to the Columbia Police Department for questioning, members of the press rushed to the Coleman family's house. To avoid further traumatizing him, the police asked him to sit in the back of an ambulance alongside his father Ron and a police chaplain. They sat in silence, lost in thought, when Chris suddenly began to beat his fists on the gurney in the back of the vehicle, as if the reality of what had happened to his family had just dawned on him. In fact, 2 minutes earlier, he had noticed the marks on his hands that he likely had not seen before. During the interrogation, when the police inquired about the red marks on his hands, he claimed that something had come over him in the ambulance, causing him to injure himself. However, Chris was unaware that the police chaplain had already informed the detectives about his odd behavior. Despite the interrogation room being sufficiently warm, Coleman requested a blanket, which he used to carefully conceal the bruises and scratches on his hands for most of the conversation, hoping they would go unnoticed. Regarding the car that supposedly slowed down when Chris pulled out of his driveway in the morning on his way to the gym, investigators reviewed the footage from the surveillance camera at Detective Barlow's house, which was aimed at the Coleman's residence. The footage revealed that Chris had left the driveway unobstructed at 5:43, with no other vehicles in the vicinity at that time. It appeared that the man was attempting to insinuate that the person behind the wheel of the car, who allegedly let him pass, could potentially be the stalker responsible for the massacre of his family. Furthermore, the surveillance camera footage indicated that no one else had entered the Coleman house between the time Chris left and when the bodies were discovered. Moreover, the man's own account sounded like a well-rehearsed performance, too unnatural for someone who had just lost their entire family, including 2 young sons. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. The pathologist's determination of the approximate time of death further complicated Chris's story, with the entire family, including Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin, having died between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., and Chris leaving the house at 5:43 a.m. His claim that he woke up, kissed his wife, and went to the gym became highly suspect. When police officers informed him that Sheri and the boys had passed away before he left the house, Chris expressed great surprise. He began to insist that his wife was lying next to him on the bed and that he believed she was alive. However, he omitted the detail about kissing Sheri before leaving, as it would have sounded completely absurd. Even if we were to assume that the entire family was killed while Chris was sleeping and he didn't notice it when he left, it would be implausible for him to have walked past the walls painted with spray paint without noticing. Clearly, Chris Coleman was caught in a lie. When he handed over his phone to the investigators, he hoped that the text messages sent to Sheri from the gym and the unanswered calls would provide him with an alibi. Instead, they revealed the true nature of their family relationship. It turned out that Chris rarely, if ever, texted or called his wife, making the long list of consecutive SMS messages interspersed with calls on that morning highly unusual. Even during extended business trips, Chris did not communicate with his wife in this manner, so his sudden decision to make up for lost time on that particular morning seemed strange. Detectives uncovered evidence that the relationship between Chris and Sheri was not as straightforward as it appeared. The man was having an affair with Sheri's school friend, a woman named Tara Lintz. To gain a clearer understanding of the relationship dynamics between the Coleman couple and the issues they faced in their marriage, let's take a step back. After the birth of their second child, Gavin, Sheri requested that Chris adjust his work schedule to spend more time with the boys, as he was away from home most of the time. His sons even had a calendar on the refrigerator where they counted down the days until their father's return. However, Chris completely rejected this idea and began to distance himself even further from his wife and children. He openly told friends, parents, and even neighbors that he believed Sheri and his sons were keeping him from fulfilling God's purpose and were standing in his way, preventing him from moving forward. Chris started to agree with his parents' view that his wife was the root of all his problems and that she had deliberately gotten pregnant to trap him into marriage. Chris was very indignant about Sheri's spending habits and complained to one of the neighbors that while he was working 80, 90 hours a week protecting a millionaire lady, his wife was sitting in a big, beautiful house, wasting money. The fact that Sheri was spending money on their children, household expenses, as well as on charity and the church, infuriated him. He believed that everything he earned belonged to him and wanted to spend it solely on himself. Despite this attitude, Sheri loved her husband and did not want to give up on their marriage, even though it was difficult for her. Chris never paid attention to his wife, never hugged or kissed her, even during intimate moments. Sheri, in turn, also shared her feelings with her friends, lamenting that she loved Chris too much and that his coldness towards her and the children broke her heart. Chris wanted a divorce and even discussed it with his employer. He knew that the preacher did not approve of divorces, and the matter could result in his dismissal. Joyce advised her bodyguard to seek advice from a family psychologist, which they did. The very first counseling session appeared successful, with Chris making every effort to keep the family together and following all the recommendations of the specialist. However, this turned out to be just an act, as Chris was simultaneously engaged in a passionate affair with Sheri's best school friend, Tara Lintz. In November 2008, the entire Coleman family traveled to Florida, where Joyce Meyer was holding a conference. Sheri, unaware of the potential consequences for her marriage, wrote to Tara expressing her desire to meet and chat, and invited her to attend Joyce's conference. This is how Chris met his future mistress. Interestingly, Tara shared many similarities with Sheri. She had the same dark hair, a similar figure, and personality. The only difference was that she was never overly persistent. Tara was a mirror image of Sheri before marriage, cheerful, flirtatious, and carefree, living one day at a time, or at least that's how Chris perceived her. Tara worked as a hostess in a gentleman's club before securing a job as a waitress at Darby Lane, where dog races were held. Chris saw her as he remembered Sheri, mischievous, attractive, and captivating the hearts of men. Their romance was not a fleeting affair. They almost immediately confessed their mutual feelings and communicated around the clock. Chris kept a note on his phone titled, "Tara Who Changed My Life," where he recorded details from the day they met. It contained all the information about this woman: the color of her eyes, her jeans size, underwear size, her favorite perfume, and flowers, which included tulips and pink roses. Chris had a list of gift ideas, including an engagement ring he intended to give her for Christmas. They discussed future children, chose names for them, and even talked about their wedding plans. Chris and Tara planned to get married in January 2010, and the mistress went as far as registering at the marriage registry. They had even selected rings for themselves. When Chris went on business trips, he paid for Tara's plane ticket. They traveled together to Phoenix and Hawaii, staying in the same hotel room. Numerous intimate photos and videos that they took for each other were also discovered on Chris's phone. Shockingly, even explicit photos of Tara were found on the computer belonging to Ron, Chris's father. The son had sent them to his father and shared details about his affair. The most disturbing aspect of the situation was that both Ron and Connie were aware of their son's infidelity, yet they approved of these extramarital relationships and supported Chris, despite being pastors. They believed that Sheri was not taking proper care of their boy and was neglecting her marital duties, which they considered the most important aspect of a relationship. They justified the affair by claiming that Sheri was not gentle enough, never complimented Chris, and kept telling him that he was capricious, which explained his attraction to the affectionate and always cheerful Tara. Sheri herself suspected an affair just a few months before her death. The date November 5th, 2008, the day Chris met Tara, appeared in the notes on Chris's phone related to his mistress. The police also took note of this, as 9 days later, emails with threats against Chris's family began to arrive. Information from the mobile phone revealed that Chris was exchanging text messages with Tara, in which he mentioned his intention to hand his wife divorce papers on May 4th, but the lawyer had made an error in writing Sheri's name. Chris stated that he would correct the mistake and give his wife the papers the next day, but he never had to do so, as on May 5th, his entire family was killed. The interrogation of Chris Coleman lasted approximately 5 hours, during which the detectives gathered all the information about him. When questioned about his mistress, Chris denied that there was anything more than a casual flirtation between them, claiming he would never do such a thing to his children. He portrayed his marriage to Sheri as an ideal union of two lovers. However, Chris was unaware that the investigators had already spoken to Tara Lintz, who had provided them with detailed information about their affair. Tara assured the police that she had no idea her lover was plotting something so horrific, but her demeanor suggested a sense of pride that a man was willing to commit a crime for her. showing no concern for the fact that her best friend from school had been found dead in her bed. Tara even boasted to the officers that Chris would send her photos of Sheri sleeping in the evenings as a guarantee that they would not engage in any intimate activities that night. On May 19, 2009, Chris Coleman was arrested at his parents' home and charged with the particularly heinous triple murder of his family. The trial commenced on April 25, 2011, and he pleaded not guilty to the massacre of his wife and children. During the proceedings, the previously mentioned case materials were presented. Tara testified as a witness, wearing the promise ring that was referenced in Chris's phone notes. Additionally, a significant amount of new information emerged during the investigation. It was revealed that all the threatening letters sent to Joyce Meyer and the Coleman family had actually been sent from Chris's laptop. The words from the emails were repeated on the walls of the house, written with spray paint and containing the same spelling errors as in the printed version. These identical mistakes were also found in other notes written by Chris and discovered in his office. Furthermore, a 3-month-old credit card payment for the purchase of a can of red paint, which was used for the inscription at the crime scene, was found on Chris's computer. A glove with traces of spray paint, discarded by Chris on his way to the gym, was also discovered near the interstate highway. The court was provided with video-recorded testimony from Joyce Meyer, who stated that on May 4th, Coleman had requested a day off for the first time in many years due to feeling unwell. Additionally, Sheri's friend, who had spoken with her shortly before her death, recalled a strange phrase. Sheri had said that if anything happened to her, it meant that Chris was responsible. On May 5th, 2011, the second anniversary of the deaths of Sheri, Gavin, and Garrett, the jury found Chris Coleman guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. They also recommended the death penalty for his actions, but the judge ultimately sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Chris attempted to appeal his sentence, but was unsuccessful. Currently, Chris Coleman is serving his sentence in a correctional facility, where he acts as a preacher. He counsels other inmates on religious matters and provides spiritual guidance. Despite this, Chris maintains his innocence. His parents, Ron and Connie, continue to fight to overturn the sentence, believing that their son was wrongfully convicted. They have not uttered a single kind word about Sheri, even after her tragic death. This heartbreaking story serves as a stark reminder of the potential for evil that often lurks within individuals, hidden behind a veneer of normalcy. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.